Greetings to everyone around the world. Today is Monday, March 9th, 2026. My name is Jennifer, and I am broadcasting from Only the Truth. In today's report, we are looking at a major geopolitical development that could reshape the global balance of power. A growing conflict in the Middle East is now placing enormous pressure on the relationship between the United States and its Gulf allies. Within just days of escalating military operations, key economic infrastructures in the region have been disrupted, energy markets have been shaken, and questions are emerging about the long-standing security partnerships between Washington and the Gulf states. Reports suggest that some Gulf countries are reviewing trillions of dollars in investments tied to the United States, while energy routes that supply a large portion of the world's oil are facing serious disruption. The situation is raising concerns about global energy prices, international trade, and the future of alliances that have defined the Middle East for decades. In the video you are about to watch, we will examine the deeper economic and political consequences of this crisis and what it could mean for global power dynamics moving forward. Before the video begins, please subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave your comments, and share this message on your social media platforms. Your support helps us spread information and bring important discussions to people across the world. Stay with us as we break down the facts behind this developing story.
8 days, that's all it has taken. 8 days since Operation Epic Fury began. 8 days since the first strikes landed. And in those 8 days, the economic geography of the entire Middle East has been rearranged by force inside the territory of America's closest Arab allies. Allies who, let us be absolutely clear, didn't ask for this war, despite the stories that were leaked subsequently. All publicly have said that they did not want the war. Oman was actively mediating, and the foreign minister expressed his disappointment that the United States didn't give peace a chance despite it being within grasp. It's clear why the GCC economies would want peace. Their economies have already been savaged in these last 8 days. Their reputation for safety and stability lies in tatters. And the war has just begun. Qatar's LNG complex at Ras Laffan, the single largest concentration of natural gas production on the planet, has been struck and production halted. Saudi Aramco's Ras Tanura refinery, the facility that's responsible for over 500,000 barrels a day, was taken offline by a drone. Kuwait's MD refinery hit by debris. Qatar's energy minister has now stated publicly what the models have been showing privately. If Gulf energy exporters shut down production within the coming weeks, not as a political choice, but as an operational necessity, oil will move to $150 per barrel. The UAE's absorbed over 1,000 drones and nearly 200 ballistic missiles. Bahrain's hotels are burning. 70% of all commercial flights across the UAE, Qatar and Bahrain are cancelled. Dubai Airport, the world's busiest airport for international passenger traffic, has been closed for days now. Hormuz traffic, the choke point through which a fifth of the world's oil normally flows, collapsed by 80%. And if Iran decides to hit at the GCC's desalination plants, they will have less than 2 weeks of drinking water. A major attack on the Persian Gulf desalination plants would trigger an immediate catastrophic water crisis, as GCC countries rely on these for up to 90% of their drinking water. Now, the United States chose to fight a war inside the economic geography of its own allies, and it's assumed that those allies would absorb the cost without recalculating the contract that they have. Now, that assumption is now being tested. Who gave you the authority to drag our region into a war with Iran? Who gave you permission to turn our region into a battlefield? Did you calculate the collateral damage before pulling the trigger? You placed GCC countries at the heart of danger they didn't choose. These questions asked by Habtoor are reverberating across the region. Khalaf al-Habtoor is a UAE billionaire, a former diplomat, one of the most connected private figures in Gulf politics. and he published an open letter to Donald Trump that was anything but diplomatic. And he's not alone in expressing this. Habtoor is not some peripheral critic. He is the establishment. When UAE elites start publicly questioning American decision-making in language that is this direct, it is not an individual speaking. It's a signal from within the system. Now, this is a country where the police threatened only this week fines and imprisonment for sharing rumors, false information, or any content that contradicts official announcements or that may cause public panic or threaten public safety, order, or health is prohibited. Habtoor had previously thrown his weight behind Donald Trump in the 2016 election campaign. He had penned at that time an op-ed for a UAE newspaper, The National, in August 2015. It was titled, "Why I'm Backing the Donald's Bid to be President." And he praised Donald Trump as a fearless doer and a successful businessman. He later withdrew support after Donald Trump called for Muslims to be barred from entering the United States. He told NBC News that he regretted supporting the Republican frontrunner. Now, according to the Financial Times, 3 of the 4 largest Gulf economies, that is Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait, they haven't named which of the 3, but 3 of them have begun a joint internal review to take assets out of the United States and overseas. A source told the FT that they're asking whether the force majeure clauses can be invoked across existing contracts. Now, you may already know that Qatar has already cited force majeure to come out of several LNG contracts that it has existing with India, among other players. Force majeure clauses basically allow suppliers to suspend any contractual obligations they have without penalty when an event beyond their control prevents the delivery. Now, Doha accounts for around 20% of global LNG supply. Now, the 3 countries, we don't know which of the 3 they are, but the 3 countries are thinking of pulling the clause to get out of the sports sponsorships, investment pledges, and maybe even back out of those huge government investment commitments that were made to Donald Trump during his tour to the Middle East last year. The president at that time announced some $3.2 trillion in investments after his trip to the Middle East in May 2025. Now, all of this is under review. And I don't know if any of you followed the recent Paramount versus Netflix bid for Warner Brothers, but Ellison's Paramount bid is being powered by $24 billion coming from sovereign wealth funds in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi. Maybe Netflix will win that deal after all. According to the Financial Times, over $2 trillion in US-held assets are potentially at risk. Now, the mainstream read on this is that the Gulf states are flexing leverage over Washington. It's a warning shot, a threat. But they don't expect it to change American behavior. And to some extent, they would be right. After all, as they were issuing those threats, Trump on Friday posted on Truth Social that he was looking for a total unconditional surrender from the Iranians, and he's going to continue until that point. However, there is a structural reality that most of the analysis is missing entirely. The United States is now an energy exporter. That's not a slogan. That's an operative fact that governs everything else in this story. American LNG right now is selling at a premium into the markets. European markets, Asian markets, all that are searching desperately for non-Gulf supply. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz is not necessarily a problem for the Trump administration. And you can even argue that from the American vantage point, it's a great outcome in many ways. The Gulf states are not partners whose trade flows need protecting. In gas, they're actually competitors who've been structurally sidelined. The United States is the largest exporter worldwide of LNG. Then taking it a step further, thinking about it more carefully, every barrel that does not leave the Arabian Gulf is a barrel that China doesn't receive. China, which is currently preparing for what comes next, when it comes to Taiwan, for example. China, which depends on Gulf energy in ways that the United States simply does not. Around 40% of its oil travels through the Straits of Hormuz. China has this week already asked its refiners to stop signing any new contracts to export fuel and to try and cancel shipments that are already committed as tight oil supply due to the Iran war curbs refinery output in the country. From Washington's perspective, a prolonged Hormuz closure is a strategic leverage being exercised automatically without American fingerprints all over it. Even Trump's offer of naval escorts and insurance for shipping through the Strait is talking to the air. There is no reality, as the Navy has made it clear. It's practically impossible for them to escort commercial ships up and down the Straits. Now, coming back to the FT story and the Middle East kingdom's potential threats to take away the candy basket from the United States. To understand the scale of what is now in motion, you need to understand the financial architecture of the US Gulf relationship in concrete terms, not abstract at percentages, but in actual numbers. Saudi Arabia alone held around $370 billion in US equity exposure in 2024. The Gulf GCC countries collectively represent somewhere between $4 to $5 trillion in US-linked financial commitments. Sovereign wealth funds, defense contracts, infrastructure agreements, bilateral investment treaties, all of that is on top. The UAE, under a framework announced during Trump's first 100 days in office, pledged those $1.4 trillion in US investments over the coming decades. The Saudis also promised close to the $1 trillion mark. Now, they're not abstract numbers. They underlie the ongoing financial architecture of the entire security relationship that the Middle East countries have had with the United States for decades now. They provide energy security and price their oil in dollars, and they spend all that money in US equity and bond markets, and increasingly through foreign direct investment. They are functionally what the Pentagon is borrowing against when it parks those carriers in the Arabian Gulf. The American security umbrella over the Gulf has always been a transaction. The United States, in return, provides security guarantees and weapon systems and an implicit premise that it would actually protect them. Now, they thought they would get the same protection as Israel if they stood with the United States. And during this war, they found out they were second-rate allies. When weapons ran in short supply, they were going to be handed to Israel first to protect itself. And their officials have started complaining as much to different media sources. The way they see it is that the implicit promise has now been broken. And what the Gulf states are doing through this FT reported discussions, through the private ceasefire lobbying that multiple outlets have now confirmed, is exactly what any rational counterparty does when a principal in a relationship exposes the agent to a unilateral risk without their consent. The GCC countries are quantifying the cost of this relationship relative to the cost of revising it. Now, as a Gulf official told the Financial Times directly, a number of Gulf countries have begun an internal review to determine whether force majeure clauses can be invoked in current contracts. The 1973 oil embargo began with a similar calculation. Arab states decided that the cost of the existing relationship exceeded the cost of weaponizing their leverage. The mechanism at that point was energy. Now the mechanism is capital. The Gulf states collectively hold enough US financial exposure that even a partial, coordinated reallocation would send tremors through the American equity markets, treasury yields, and the dollar itself. And the threat is credible. Now, the question is whether Washington believes it's credible. And based on everything we can see and observe about how the Trump administration is currently reading this situation, the answer appears to be not yet. Analysts have already cut gross domestic product growth forecasts for the Gulf region by up to 1 percentage point. And that is assuming the conflict lasts only a few weeks. Bahrain's credit rating has been downgraded into junk due to its persistent budget deficits of over 10%. But the Gulf states aren't just facing a revenue shock. They're not just managing a temporary disruption until the war ends and the energy prices stabilize and they can once again export their oil. they also potentially face a legitimacy crisis of fundamentally different order. One, that they need the money to spend, but they don't have the money to spend right now. And especially if this war continues, that's going to hit their production capacity, that's going to hit their revenue targets. Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE have all spent decades building a very specific social contract. And it's quite beautiful and elegant. The formula is very simple, but it's structurally very fragile as well. Their citizens receive subsidies, stable employment in the public sector, world-class infrastructure, and the psychological comfort of national prestige. They set up these mega projects, sport franchises, and global brand recognition. In return, these people, their citizens, stay politically compliant. They don't demand representative governance. They don't demand democracies. They do not organize and protest. They do not push back against these ruling families whose legitimacy isn't coming through democratic mandate, but coming through the delivery of material comfort. Now that model has three requirements: money, stability, and the perception of invulnerability. And the sense that the Gulf is a zone of exception. It's prosperous. It's insulated. It's above the chaos that afflicts the rest of the region. That is why the Abrahamic Accords were done. Now, all of those three requirements have now been destroyed simultaneously. The money is contracting. Energy revenues are collapsing. Shipping through the Hormuz has effectively stopped. Tourism, a sector all four states have invested enormous political capital to diversify themselves away from the oil, has fallen off a cliff. Budget pressures that were already building up well before the war have accelerated overnight, and the stability is gone. When 1,000 more drones come over Dubai or the UAE, missiles that get intercepted above Abu Dhabi, refineries that are on fire, citizens who were told the story that their governments had secured them from exactly this kind of violence are now watching it unfold in real time from their phones. And expats are leaving in droves. One post that went viral said that he moved to the UAE as a tax shelter. Instead, he's in a bomb shelter. The UAE government warned people not to post anything on social media that went against what the government was saying otherwise. They're going to prison. That invulnerability has now been shattered for the GCC. The Gulf space spent years cultivating an image of strategic neutrality and managed relationships, friendly with Washington, accommodating towards Tehran when necessary, useful to everyone in the region. But that image is now gone. They're now visibly, undeniably caught in the middle of a war they didn't choose, and their governments cannot construct a narrative that makes this look like a strength. 1 week in and they've already lost staggering sums. Between 6 and 12 months from now, we're looking at mass contract cancellations, widespread layoffs in sectors that have absorbed enormous numbers of both expatriates and national workers, and their fiscal positions that will not be able to be sustained and will become politically unacceptable, and they'll have to make cuts to the very subsidies that kept the public sector employees happy and their populations submissive and quiet. And when that distribution stops, the contract is going to collapse. Saudi Arabia is a different case, and it does deserve a separate treatment. That kingdom will not face the same rapid destabilization necessarily, especially when you look at the timeline of Kuwait, Qatar, or UAE, because it's much larger. Its population is much more complex. Its geography gives it much more insulation, and its ruling family has survived crises in the past that would have destroyed other governments. But that doesn't mean Saudi Arabia is stable. It means its instability will take a different form. In 2011, Saudis were said to have spent over $30 billion to stave off the Arab revolution that was hitting the region. They gave out money like opening a water from water coming out of a tap to their population to keep them happy. But right now, the Saudis face a significant budget deficit. Where's that water coming from? Mohammed bin Salman built his entire claim to power on a single proposition. that he was the man who was going to transform Saudi Arabia into a post-oil economy. Vision 2030 is not just an economic plan. It was his justification for concentrating power in his own hands, for sidelining all those rival princes, for suppressing massively internal dissent, for imprisoning activists. All of this was justified, implicitly or explicitly, by the argument that Saudi Arabia needed a strong hand to navigate the transformation for the economy away from oil dependency. Now, that transformation was already strained before the war. NEOM, the flagship mega project, faced cost overruns, contractor disputes, and forced displacement of thousands of people from their ancestral land. The tourism targets have underperformed. The entertainment sector has grown, but not at the pace that would justify the capital that was allocated to it. Non-oil revenue as a share of GDP has improved, but remains far below the target that MBS set in 2016. The project has been massively downsized. Now, at a war that has struck Saudi infrastructure directly, Ras Tanura, one of the most critical export facilities in the world, with oil revenues collapsing at precisely the moment the vision needed them the most to fund the transition. The internal Saudi power struggle did not disappear when MBS consolidated control. It was papered over with oil money, prestige projects, and the narrative of inevitable positive transformation. That paper won't need much before it starts burning again. Beware a calm surface. You never know what lies beneath. The Saudi regime may survive and form, but the regime change within the House of Saud itself is always a live scenario. Rivals who were neutralized, not eliminated, obviously, are watching from the sidelines. Family members are calculating. Now, it's not a prediction that Saudi Arabia will collapse. It's basically a statement saying that the structural conditions for a serious internal power challenge within the House of Saud will present itself if this war continues for too long. Washington's calculation appears to be that the Gulf states need the American security umbrella more than the America needs Gulf cooperation. And that may be correct in the immediate term. It may be correct for the next 6 months. And it might even be correct through to the end of this war. But the structural damage is being done to the relationship, and it's not going to be temporary. The Gulf governments that survive this crisis will emerge from it with a fundamentally different understanding of what American security guarantees are worth. This Gulf leadership already has closer relations with China than the generation before them. The Saudis are already selling some of their oil in yuan to the Chinese. Soon they will make different decisions about where to park their sovereign wealth, which currencies to hold their reserves in, which security partnerships to invest in, and how much base access to extend to a partner that treats its allies as terrain rather than counterparties. That is the long-run cost of the assumptions that allies are clients. Not an immediate rupture necessarily, but it will be a gradual structural decoupling that will change the architecture of American power projection in the region over the next decade. Now, the 1973 embargo didn't destroy the US Gulf relationship, but at the time, it also permanently changed it. This moment has that same quality. Whatever the immediate outcome, the relationship that's going to come out on the other side will not be the relationship that went in. Habtoor's letter ended with a line that deserves to be the final word here. True leadership is not measured by war decisions, but by wisdom, respect for others, and pushing towards achieving peace. I am Najma Minhas with GVS Deep Dive. Thanks for joining me today. Have a great day.
Before we close, we want to hear from you. The world is changing rapidly, and your voice matters in these discussions. Please share your thoughts in the comment section and join the conversation. Question 1. Do you believe the growing tensions between the United States and the Gulf countries could permanently reshape global alliances? Question 2. If Gulf nations begin moving their investments away from the United States, how do you think this could affect the global economy and energy markets? Leave your comments below and share this video across your social media platforms so more people can join the conversation.